we have not had a death in South Africa. The pandemic requires urgent action, and the President, leading the Cabinet, met on the 15th of March and took very specific decisions. One of them was to declare the state of disaster in the country in terms of the National Disaster Management Act of 2002. Following that, the President, in his address to the nation later that night, called for an extraordinary response and announced a number of measures to limit contact between persons who may be infected and those who are not infected in order to reduce the spread of the disease using social distancing and hygiene measures. Some of these measures were put into operation already through existing legislation, but some of them, those that were put into place immediately using existing legislation were like the ban on travel foreign nationals from the high-risk countries, the cancellation of visas, issuance of travel alerts and travel as advisories, undergoing high intense screening, the closure of 35 land ports and 2 seaports to try and limit the movement of people into the country so that we can be able to screen people as they come in. So the fewer the ports, the better the screening would be. But notwithstanding this, some of the measures announced by the President could only be brought to bear through regulations made under the declaration of the state of emergency in terms of Section 27 of the Disaster Management Act. And since Sunday, legal representatives of the respective organs of state that play a key role in responding to COVID-19 have been at work to draft the regulations needed to further put into operation measures announced by the President. These regulations are a rule of order which have the force of law. So these regulations need to be acted upon because they are law. And the departments will further give directions or directives on other matters. And as the situation evolves, more regulations and more directives may have to be issued. So I will just now mention a few areas where these regulations touch. One, it talks about the definitions, but the second part of the regulations are about releasing resources. They particularly mention the defense because it probably has most of the resources that might be needed, but other departments also may release resources. And those resources may be in the province, at national, or even at local. Then number 3, it deals with the prevention and prohibition of gatherings. That has been discussed nationally very widely, that there are no gatherings that should be more than 100 people. And of course, in places where alcohol is served, it limits that to 50 people. And these regulations, as I say, are law and they have to be adhered to. Number 4, it's about people who may refuse medical examination or treatment or isolation or quarantine. Because in a pandemic like this one and in a state of disaster that has been declared, you have to be examined if you are found to have been in contact or to have symptoms. And if you need to be quarantined or isolated, you have to comply. You don't have the luxury of refusing examination or treatment or isolation or quarantine. Number 5, again, it talks about places of quarantine, because it's important that in every area there are places of quarantine in situations where people cannot be quarantined in their own homes. Regulation 6 is about closure of schools and partial care facilities, which has already happened yesterday. 7, it deals with the suspension of visits for 30 days to correctional services. 8 deals with the limitation of sale and dispensing and transportation of alcohol. The reason I'm not going into details is because the ministers concerned, most of them are here, so they will give the details of each of these, on each of these areas. Regulation 9 is about emergency procurement procedures. As you know, our procurement procedures do take a bit long, but in this instance, the Disaster Management Act allows for emergency procurement, but we don't want this emergency procurement to be abused. So the Treasury will give us directives on how this will be used, but it's to ensure that nobody is short of what is needed. No department is short, or local government or province is short of what they need to combat COVID-19 because of procurement issues. Regulation 10, of course, gives the authority to different ministers to issue further directives. 11 is about offenses and penalties, because if these are law, then obviously there are offenses related to them and penalties. And 12 explains that they come into effect on the day they are published, which was yesterday. And I think it's important to get further clarification from the ministers so that you can inform the country accurately. But also the issue of fake news or misrepresentation is under these regulations, because it is under these regulations an offense to deliberately misrepresent or even deliberately infect someone when you know you are positive for the coronavirus. So this is just a summary of what is in the regulations, but the various ministers will then give more details. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We will now ask colleague, or not more questions. No, you can add. Just ask, just add a few items. Yes, then we can take questions. Now I'm in charge. Now, but you all know that we are in a state of disaster. And therefore, in that state, we need regulations that speak to that state. And those regulations, colleagues, are law, as Mam Kosazan has said. They are, you can't just avoid them at your own peril. Let's get Minister of Justice to speak to that part. And the Minister of Police will also speak to that part.
No, thank you very much. Oh. I forgot to Mvelasa. I think for us, what is clear is that the limitations of rights in terms of Section 36 is now being enforced by these regulations that have been published by the Minister of CoGTA. And in that regard, we will want to see maximum compliance across the country with the regulations, and any failure of compliance will be visited upon by the necessary actions by the law enforcement agencies. On any aspects of the regulations, with regards to the various issues, fake news, deliberate infections of other people, and other offenses that could happen, even including people not complying to the issue of less than 100 gatherings. So for us, this is a very important means to help us to combat this, to also enforce the issue of social distance. With regard to correctional services, as we speak, we are busy at the various correctional centers with the cleaning, with the hygiene processes that will be necessary for us to comply with the regulations, because the regulation says the visit is suspended for 30 days. We do not want to take any chance. Hence, we are currently busy with the processes of cleaning and ensuring that the environment is hygienic. It will enable us to minimize and prevent the corona from entering our correctional centers. And as and when the situation change, we will be able to further communicate. I think those are the only issues I will speak to, unless there will be questions. Thank you.
Minister of Police. Uyabambana ke.
No, thanks, Mthembu, Minister Dlamini Zuma. At the end of the day, everything that is said here will have to be enforced. Every other thing will have to be enforced by the police, as explained there. Minister Lamola and myself will have a further explanation, I'm told, tomorrow, but there are quick things that we can speak to. Yesterday, I think there was some press briefing where they spoke about getting permission from the police station if the numbers can increase or not. There is no such thing. Nothing of the sort. You don't go to police station, you go straight to funeral and you go with 100 people. You don't go to police station, you go to wedding, you go with 100 people. This law will never be watered down anywhere else. Whatever you have heard is not there, does not exist. What exists is, is what is written here. Indeed, Honorable President has invited the clergy and the people from the faith-based organization. Most of them, they preside over these funerals, over these weddings. I'm sure they'll also put the word that it's not negotiations, it's a law. As we speak, the police are meeting. We meet first thing early morning again, dealing with the guidelines. We're putting the response teams where you're supposed to be 100, will count to 100. Anything more than 100 will be requested to go. But if you continue to break the law, this law is very clear that will deal with organizers. And organizers will be liable for any of the broken law. It was very interesting, Minister Dlamini Zuma. Every time this COVID-19 has been taking the lead, but this morning the lead was on alcohol matters. this morning, the lead was on liquor matters. The closing at 6. Yes, indeed. Nobody consumes alcohol at 6 anywhere in the country except your house. Nobody. So there is one point that we need to clarify. They were asking about restaurants. Restaurants, you can continue to eat less than 50, but no alcohol, only food. 6 is shut down, complete shutdown when it comes to alcohol. You will be able only in your own house, nowhere else. So that must be clear. Anybody that sells alcohol and consume alcohol at any other place except your own place, you are liable for any form of punishment. That is from Monday to Friday. Saturday, you consume no alcohol after 1. And Sunday, unless you are in your father's place or your own place. So we must be clear. We'll be giving more guidelines on these matters. As we explained, we just wanted to move on that one. Somebody was saying it will be only taverns that will be closed. Remember, there are places that are taverns that they sell food. They'll continue food minus alcohol. That includes restaurants and all other places, not the places that you usually find in the township. Nightclubs, there is absolutely nothing. This thing of dancing with your mouth shut and shouting this side, Corolla, Corolla, is not going to be there. As it has been said time and again, we are really looking this 50 from the justice cluster with the jaundice eye. We're looking 50 might be still too big. Yes, 50 might be still big. We're looking at it with a jaundice eye, behaving, depending how you behave, going forward on these matters. We'll be coming with guidelines. What do we do with people that 50 and all that? We'll be dealing with that. But I'm glad to say next 24 hours, all police at the CSS, that is what we used to call church offices, now it's CSS, Community Service Centers, will be having their gear, will be having their mask and all that, because we want to keep them safe as much as we can. 1,153 police stations, we'll start with them in the country, and then work hard on the instruction of the law that they must be clean police station, sanitized, gloves. It's difficult to get these things. They're absolutely not. The market is dry when it comes to this thing. But we are working hard to, especially those that are at the front line, to make sure. We are not going to be hard on the people that are on the funeral. That does not mean that we allow you to pass 100. Nobody will. Nobody in the eating place where the alcohol is selling will pass 50. Nobody will be selling or buying an alcohol 1 minute past 6. Nobody will be buying or selling alcohol in a public place at 2 minutes to 9 in the morning. And there are no street bashes. Those people that will be, anyway, it's illegal in South Africa to drink in public. So street bashes are things of yesterday, and we'll make sure that we work with you. I hope you'll cooperate. Everybody will cooperate. We'll be having meetings with the people that deal with these matters. But the meeting is just information. It's no negotiations of the change of the law. Don't go to police stations, I repeat. Go to funeral, less 100 less, go to wedding. Police at the police station, you'll be just clocking them and giving them the extra job. They've got nothing to do with that. They are to implement the law. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Kwele. Minister Patel, tell us about the market.
Thank you very much, colleague. I'm going to be commenting on Regulation 10 that has been gazetted. By way of context, the effect of the COVID-19 on the economy is being closely watched. It will have an effect on our GDP, but our key concern now is to save lives and ensure that we minimize the economic cost. After we've defeated the virus, we will all need to work together to rebuild the economy. We've been in discussions with the private sector and organized labor to get broad support for government's actions and to mobilize their resources too to complement and strengthen our efforts. The discussions have been positive, and across many sectors of the economy, we received pledges of support and partnership. Over the past few days, we've, through the National Department of Health, engaged the private healthcare industry to become part of government's coordinated effort to fight the virus. In order to facilitate discussions solely for the purpose of fighting the virus, and as part of the national health efforts coordinated by Minister Mkhize, we've been looking at the competition legislation and what exemptions may be required. Today, we have just published a regulation that deals with the health sector, and it will permit private healthcare providers to coordinate their actions as part of the National Department of Health's efforts. And this will include sharing of beds, sharing of facilities, medical supplies, nurses, doctors, and so on. This has been done under the new provision of Section 1010 of the Competition Act, approved by Parliament in 2018 and signed into law last year. It will include hospitals and healthcare facilities, medical suppliers, medical specialists and radiologists, pathologists and laboratories, pharmacies and healthcare funders. Second, we are working with retailers and large food producers now to ensure that the supply chain from the farm through the factory to the shops remains strong and that basic goods are available to our people. Factories have reported that their production is stable, and farmers have promised us a bumper maize crop this year. We have seen, however, a spike in stockpiling over the weekend and for much of this week in some retail outlets. It tapered off, it decreased somewhat yesterday. At the same time, there is anecdotal evidence of price spikes in areas such as face masks and hand sanitizers. We are appreciative that the majority of South Africans have not rushed to the stores and have indeed remained calm. Working with retailers and the regulators in the past few days, all major retailers have now put limits on at least basic products in their stores. This has helped to calm panic buying. There's also been excellent cooperation from the retailers with government. They have committed to help us ensure that there are no unjustified price increases in this period. The retail groups include Shoprite Checkers, Pick n Pay, Woolworths, Spar, Game, Dion and Macro, as well as Clicks and Dis-Chem. Today, we issue directives under the Disaster Management Act and regulations under both the Competition Act and the Consumer Protection Act. These deal with pricing and supply matters during the national disaster to ensure that we do not have unjustified price hikes or stockpiling of goods. We are doing this to protect consumers and ensure fairness and promote social solidarity in this period. The regulations and directions provide for the following. On prices, price increases may not exceed the increase in the cost of the raw materials or inputs, and the profit level should not be hiked higher than in the period just before the outbreak of COVID-19. The regulations will cover the full supply chain and will limit price increases of suppliers in a similar fashion. On stockpiling, where people go into a shop and try to buy trolley loads of one product, all retailers will be required to take steps to limit the quantity of goods sold to any individual consumer, and a list of basic goods will be covered and gazetted. Retailers must take steps to maintain adequate stocks of basic goods during this period, including for weekends and month-end shopping. There are also provisions to ensure that wholesalers take steps to ensure that there's no stockpiling at the cash and carry retail and wholesale outlets. The regulations and the directions are based on the first instance on a partnership model that requires retailers and wholesalers to take prudent and responsible steps. The regulations and directives will allow government to take firmer measures if they become necessary, including setting limits on individual products. We do not believe that this will be necessary immediately, as we expect that by working together with the business community and our people, we can contain prices and limit any stockpiling. I want to point out that the breaches of the regulations can have serious consequences. Some of the penalties in the relevant legislation include penalties of up to R1 million, penalties of up to 10% of a company's turnover, or jail sentences of up to 1 year. We do not want to invoke any of these, as the best approach is one of partnership, and we welcome the solidarity and the positive response from our people in the last few days. But the regulators are ready to act. We have present here today Commissioner Tembinkosi Bonakele, the head of the Competition Commission, as well as Commissioner Tezi Mabuza, the head of the National Consumer Commission. The Consumer Commission will have a toll-free hotline that can be used by our people to report increases in prices that are unjustified, and the number will be made available to the media today. We'll also send, it's just been gazetted as we started the press conference, so copies of the regulations and the directives will be forwarded to the media this afternoon. The two regulators will also be available for any of the media queries immediately after the press briefing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Members of the media, we now open for questions from your side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in that order. And it will be, the Minister of Police, he says that he thought that there will be no questions. Yes, Juanette. I'm starting with you.
Thank you very much, Juanita Hunter from the Sunday Times. Just two questions of clarity, ministers. The issue of the issue of going to police for 100. So what the Premier said yesterday is that you will have to get permission to hold a funeral or wedding at 100. So you're saying that's not the case, Minister? And then just
he said that law doesn't say that. He said that law says 100.
No,
the law says
what
100.
the Premier said is that even if you're having 100 people at a funeral, or less than 100, you'd have to go to a police to get permission, and that's not the case. And then just one last question to Minister Patel about these laws that you've been citing. When does it get into effect, and when will we see it gazetted? Thank you.
Snatemba Madolota, Karanda FM. Minister Kale, two questions. Is there a way to regulate that your nightclubs, your taverns, your shebeens don't sort of go over 100, and whether or not that at 6 o'clock they will shut down, there will be no selling of your alcohols and the likes? And do you have an idea of the exact charge or the penalties for people who do sort of break the law, I guess.
Next.
Good afternoon, Ministers. Barry Bateman from ENCA. Two questions quickly. Ekurhuleni Mayor Mzandile Masina made an announcement yesterday, something about the procurement of a vaccine from Cuba. How does this fit in with CoGTA's position, and why isn't the national government taking the lead on the procurement of any type of vaccination, whatever he might actually be referring to? If you can just clarify that aspect. And then another one. Ordinarily, this time of the year, the briefing we'd be having is with the Transport Minister. We're going into the Easter holidays, and we know it's a very important time of year. The government has spoken to the ZCC for their pilgrimage, but there's an informal pilgrimage of Gauteng to KZN. People have spent money, often quite in advance, for these holidays, and I'm sure with the best appeals, there will still be people who want to travel. How do you anticipate dealing with that? If you look at the mass exodus to the coast, you look at the petrol stations. I mean, there are hundreds of people moving in out of there to get into restaurants and the like. How do you anticipate to cope with this kind of exodus of people to the coast? Thank you.
Next. What did you do to our instrument?
I didn't do anything, Minister.
You should have done something to make it not to work.
Minister, thank you. It's Natasha Perry here from the SABC News. I just want to know, in terms of areas where, I mean, people don't have basic sanitation services and water services, will you be providing those services in light of, COVID-19? And then, speaking to the EFF, I think on Monday, they had suggested that government needs to probably state quarantine people instead of them being in self-isolation. And are you considering such facilities? And then lastly, today the Gauteng legislature, the NCOP endorsed the decision to dissolve the city of Tshwane. I haven't heard anything from you. Can we, perhaps have a reaction to that? Thank you.
Next.
Hi, Ministers Wonga Dlulwane, EWN. First question for you, Police Minister. When we say enforcing of the law, when it comes here, I'm sure a plan will come later, but are we talking about a special police alcohol funerals situation where, because I'm trying to understand, because we're a country with limited resources, so in order to enforce these, you'll need manpower, you'll need money, you'll need vehicles. So I just want to understand the practicality of implementing these rules on that part. And number two, how do you increase the response to this corporate government minister? Is it by case basis? Because you said as the situation spreads, the rules might change. So I'm just trying to understand, is there a period to look for or a time, or is that also under assessment? For you, Minister Patel, are there any ways of mitigating issues that are against the economy, any mitigation plans so that we can try in some sort of way to make sure that the impact is not as hard as we have it right now? And my last question.
I was just about to stop you. Thank you very much. Let's stop you there.
Yeah, okay, that's finished, Minister. Is there a plan to stop media gathering like this? Because I'm getting the sense that as the time goes, you also be saying too many people are inside such briefings. Is there a way of trying to say in the future we might not have situations like these? Thank you.
We are sticking to the law. At the moment, the law says that you can't have 100. You are not 100. If you were 100, we would not have had you here. We would have reduced you. Kulumaba. We can't go to a place where we can hear you.
All right, Buleli Chiti from ETV News. Look, it's no secret that corruption is rife in this country. I just wanted to know, in terms of procuring of resources and other things, how are we going to facilitate that as a government? How are we going to look and ensure that strict measures are placed and that tenderpreneurs and bidders comply and regulate according to the principles of the law? Thanks.
Yes, Madam.
Hi, I'm Zara Karim from News 24. I also wanted to add on or ask another question after Barry's question about the transport situation. How, if you do know, how does a person get COVID-19 clearance to travel, where, you know, with these travel restrictions? And number two is, if possible, could you please give us more information on the new numbers, the 150 cases? Thanks.
Yeah, the last one.
Ministers, I just want to ask, just for clarity, so I communicate this to the owners of bars and stuff like this. So just to be clear, as I understand it, 50 gatherings of 50 people for restaurants, clubs, and all places where alcohol is being served will only be for 50 people during all the time, and then from 6 they will stop serving alcohol, but they don't need to close down from then. If I understand it correctly, I just want to have clarity on that. So, thank you.
Colleagues, let's just first start with the intention that we had in mind for this press conference. The intention was to give you the regulations so that we are all on the same boat. Regulations which will indeed strengthen our fight against coronavirus, but regulations that are in tandem with the state of disaster that we have declared, that was declared by the President. Now, where we will not be able, because had we known that you'll be coming with questions that go beyond the scope of this press conference, we would have called all the ministers. Minister Zwelim Kiza could not be here because of other urgent matters that needed to be visited. Similarly, Minister Mtswaledi could not be here. But where we are able to answer, definitely we will. Don't say that we don't want, we can't answer many things on transport until, of course, we have the minister and we have decided on a particular plan of action led by him. He's not here. But having said that, I'll allow colleagues to respond to your questions. Ma'am Kosasan.
Thank you very much. First, let me just say that on the question of a vaccine, there is no vaccine yet. There is a lot of work that's being done to get a vaccine, but there isn't a vaccine yet. And as the Minister of Health said in the earlier meeting, that in South Africa we're looking at maybe 18 months before we can say there can be a vaccine. So there is no vaccine. I think what they were talking about, in Cuba, there is a drug they are using called interferon, which is not a vaccine, is not a cure, but it assists also in boosting your immunity so that your body is able to fight the virus. I think that's what they were talking about. Rather than a vaccine, maybe they called it a vaccine, but there is no vaccine yet. Today's figures is 150. That's what comes from the Minister of Health. I think there were 34 new cases from yesterday. Now, the question about water and sanitation, yes, it's a serious matter because we are saying people must wash their hands with water and soap regularly. And many people may not even afford sanitizers, so it's very important that they do have access to water and sanitation. The Minister of Water and Sanitation, together with municipalities, are working on this. The government has given very clear instructions. There'll be short-term solutions, medium-term, and long-term. In the short term, of course, we may use JoJo tanks and tankers to fill the JoJo tanks within communities. That will be very short term. boreholes in the medium term, but also reticulation where there is a source of water, reticulation to the communities. So the water issue is something that has been given a very high priority within government. On the question of the dissolution of Tshwane Metro, of course, when you dissolve a municipality or a metro, it is mainly when there has been a failure to deliver services because the metro or the municipality has not been functioning properly. Because at the base of everything we do is about delivering services to our people. So when you get a situation where there is no mayor, there is no municipal manager, then we know the water issues in Tshwane have been very difficult. They have treatment plants, but those treatment plants don't function. Maybe only 2 do function. So there has been serious challenges. And they've not been able to meet, to make quorums, to adopt the adjustment budgets and so on. So the province then took a decision to dissolve. But according to the law, they will take that decision and then send us a communication to check whether we concur. And we have to exercise our minds ourselves and then concur. If we concur, then we go to the NCOP, the NCOP concurs, then the process is finished, then there will be dissolution. So we concurred, we had to concur even before it went to the NCOP. So our view is that we agree with the dissolution. And when we said that as the situation evolves, rules might change. Obviously, the pandemic is not static. It may be that we may need stronger regulations or stronger measures. And those measures will depend. Let's say, for instance, there is a very rapid increase in a particular area or town or city or whatever, and there needs to be a state of emergency in that area or a shutdown to curb the rapid spread, then these regulations will then be strengthened in that particular area. So there are all sorts of possibilities, but they will be determined by the concrete reality of what is happening on the ground around this pandemic. And of course, the day everything gets back to normal, then some of the regulations will be unnecessary. So that's what we mean, that yes, as the situation evolves, the regulations may be strengthened or scaled down if things are coming back to normal. But for now, these regulations that are in place must be complied with. I think it's very important for you as the ladies and gentlemen of the media to convey this to the public so that the public doesn't think it's optional. They must get the view that this is law and the law must be obeyed. And if it's not obeyed, it will be enforced. And it's important because it's not just about yourself as an individual. It's about other people, your family, your neighbors, your community, the rest of South African citizens. So it would be very selfish of anyone to want to break the law knowing that you are endangering other people by doing so. If maybe you were just endangering yourself, it would be something else. But here, you are endangering other people, the entire nation. So it's very important that that message is conveyed and conveyed very clearly. I think that's, and then the issue of quarantine. If you look at the regulations with us, Public Works, the regulation says Public Works, together with local municipalities, and of course where possible provinces, must identify areas and buildings and institutions or lodges or whatever where people can be quarantined. We're also working with the Minister of Tourism to identify those places that are owned by the state that can be used to quarantine. And this is very important because for a person to be adequately quarantined, you need, quarantine means you mustn't have contact, direct contact with other people. Now, if you are not able to do that at home, clearly government will have an obligation to provide those quarantine. There are already some places that we are identifying, and preferably every district must have a place where people can be quarantined. So this is work in progress, and as the need arises to quarantine people, those places that have been identified will obviously be announced and people will be quarantined in those places. It's not punishment, it's actually protection of other people so that you do not pass the infection to the next person or to even the rest of your family. Thank you.
Colleagues, anyone also want to respond? Minister Lamola.
Yeah, mine is not a lot. It's only, I think the one that you say, oh. I think it's related to the question that deals with the issue of corruption. As you will have seen, the regulations are very clear, subject to the Public Finance Management Act and subject to the Municipal Finance Management Act in terms of the issues of emergency procurement and so forth. So whoever is going to procure is expected to comply with the PFMA in regard to the emergency provisions and the regulations thereof, including the Municipal Finance Management Act. So it does not suspend the two laws that govern public procurement. It just says use the emergency procurement, but still comply because there are directives from National Treasury and regulations how you deal with such issues. Thank you.
Yes.
These regulations are national regulations. There are no provincial regulations. What it says here goes. If you go to these regulations and you take definitions. Definition of gathering means any assembly, concourse, or procession of more than 100 persons, wholly or partially in open air or in the building or premises. And then you go to 3.1. 3.1 says, in order to contain the spread of the COVID-19, a gathering is prohibited. That gathering has been already defined. You read it. There is no negotiations here. That's a point we want to make on that one. The second one, it is defined. It is defined here what will happen to you. You will be detained, arrested, if you break these laws, and go to prison for 6 months, or get a fine, or both. It's here. We're not going to be guessing about it. The question of 50 and in the areas that they trade with liquor is not 100. Gathering there is 50. But let's explain it. There are places that sell liquor and food. That would be your restaurant. Some areas that you know in your Soweto and all that, they sell liquor and food. After 6, there will be food. You will still go and eat in restaurant. But there'll be no drop of alcohol on the table. No drop of alcohol. You'll just eat. Liquor. That, I guess, is clear. You can still go to these places. For now, and don't drink after 6, don't drink before 9. But the law is very clear that the organizer of those events that break the law will be liable. But on the definitions too, it is explained and somewhere that we will make a call of you in this gathering to disperse. If not, then the law enforcers will act. Somebody asked about the police. By the way, we'll give you the number of the shippings we have in South Africa. We do have. So we've been working. We do have. We know that they're legal. We've shut down those that are not illegal. And we have been working on this thing of alcohol for a very long time. The problem is that the law before Honorable Minister Kosazana signed this beautiful one. That one, there were shippings that are closing at 4 in the morning. There were shippings that are closing at 2. There are taverns that are closing at 12. Here, 6 shut down everybody. There are no options. There are no negotiations. Thank you very much.
Minister Patel, if you also want the commissioners to come in, they can.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Let me just respond to the Sunday Times question. The new regulations and the directions come into effect immediately. Today, the 19th of March, the Gazette has been published, and we will make copies of the Gazette available electronically to all the media. In respect of the EWN question, as my colleague, Minister Mthembu, has indicated, today we want to focus principally on the regulations. There will be more detailed briefing that we'll arrange on the economy, but I want to indicate that we're working very hard on mitigation plans. Of course, the most immediate thing is to save lives and prevent the spread of the virus. That already has a positive impact on the economy. Secondly, we're putting in place a number of measures to help companies and individuals that are displaced by the effects of the virus. These will include a special fund for companies in distress. They will include what we call a temporary employer-employee relief scheme. They will also include redirecting our efforts from current government spending and support to efforts linked to the virus. For example, we won't do export promotion in the normal way, but we'll assist exporters now who's got their goods on the water or stranded elsewhere. And we also try to find opportunity where, in fact, we can get more economic activity for our own producers. And there will be measures dealing with small and medium enterprises. The Minister of Finance is dealing with a number of issues relating to the economy. So it's work done across all of government. As soon as we're ready, we will be making these announcements, and I think that covers that area. On the procurement of resources by ETV, I think my colleague, Minister Lamola, has responded to that. I want to take the opportunity, if I may, Minister Mthembu, to invite first through you Commissioner Tembi Bonakele and then Commissioner Tezi Mabuza, the respective heads of the Competition Commission and of the National Consumer Commission, to say a few words here today. Their job is to ensure that we enforce the new regulations, and they are ready to ensure that we give effect to these and that we have the stability that we all need. Commissioner Bonakele, if you may want to come forward, and if Commissioner Mabuza could come in the meantime.
We would like to give you as much information as we are able to give you, particularly when we are with commissioners here who are doing a wonderful job. We wouldn't like them to leave here without having assured you of the work that you are doing, what they are doing, particularly around issues of competition and pricing. Khuluma-ke baba.
Thank you very much, Minister Mtembu, honorable ministers. In times like this, we, as the Competition Commission, recognize that there are areas where the law would need to be relaxed, but there are also areas where it would need to be strengthened. And Minister Patel has already explained those areas where there is some relaxation in the form of exemptions. This is where industry needs to coordinate in a manner that ordinarily would have been described as collusion, which would have been a contravention. So those industries, in this case, the first candidate has been the healthcare sector. It has been exempted to conduct all of these consultations that are necessary for them to respond to the crisis. Insofar as other sectors are concerned, we are worried there about excessive pricing and price gouging. Ourselves, Competition Commission, as well as the National Consumer Protection Commission, are working very closely together to make sure that we stamp such conduct out. We have, as the Competition Commission, powers to prosecute excessive pricing, and we have been issued with regulations that provide a guide on how we should enforce during this period of this crisis. And this will be really areas where there are price increases, where there has been no cost, input cost justification that should have triggered the price increases. So we will be watching for those, but we are really dependent on the public to inform us when there are such unusual price increases. We will give a number. We will all be using the same number together with the National Consumer Commission, the toll-free number that people could call. They could also go to our websites where they can inform us of what is going on in the markets. We also have been talking to our courts, because we both have specialist courts, so that when these cases are brought to our attention, they can be investigated and prosecuted on an expedited basis. So the Competition Commission will fast track its investigations, and the Competition Tribunal will also fast track its hearings. My colleague will announce the number. I don't want to take too much time, where all of these cases can be reported. We are calling upon not just members of the public, but also participants in markets, such as retailers, that when they face price increases from suppliers, because sometimes retailers themselves buy from intermediaries. So when they face those unusual price increases, they should inform authorities so that at least they can be monitoring and transparency of pricing during this crisis period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sisi.
And Mbonge Baba. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you for the opportunity. As my colleague has said, from our side as the National Consumer Commission, we'll be focusing mostly on the unconscionable, unfair, unreasonable, and unjust pricing. This is really to look at the downside of the market where consumers are concerned. And what is really also an issue here is to make sure that at retail price, consumers have access to essential goods. And that is why now, even in the regulation, we're looking at ensuring that while consumers have a right to buy as much as they want, there is a responsibility on our retailers to make sure that at least there is equitable share of some of the resources, especially to make sure that those consumers that would have their salaries, maybe by Friday or maybe at the end of the month, that they also have access to those goods. So the limitation of rights here would be imposed from the supplier side to make sure that there is rationing where we can. And also what is really important for us is the issue of misleading of information. We have now even observed, as Minister has said, wherein we have seen that other products are packaged that could be saying that they would be containing certain ingredients that are not there, and also the issue of the pricing. And then, as my colleague has said, we are really dependent on all South Africans to inform us so that we can take decisive actions. And then in the enforcement side, instead of following the route that we would follow of people complaining, in this instance, we would be looking at trends. So we've established a number, which is a toll-free number, a 0800 014 880. For people just to call us and give us information, the number is 0800 014 880. And we have also set up a special Twitter handle, which is @NCC_COVID-19. This is to allow people that if you have picked up a price, you know that today you've bought a sanitizer for, let's say, 30 Rand, and next week it jumps up to like 60 Rand. That would mean that we have to justify the jump in price. So that is where now we want you to give us as much information, because we will be looking at the trends instead of just looking at individual complaints. So we are dependent on you and also on every consumer to play their part. But what is important is, as a consumer, please don't hoard. Make sure that if your hands are clean, but your neighbor's hands are not clean, it doesn't help any of us. So let us help each other here or one another. Thank you. Thank you.
Colleagues, we know that you will still have a number of questions, but we work under a leadership that is waiting for us now. We should have been in the meeting of the National Command Council from 3 o'clock. Time, it's about 20 past now. Of course, yes, the minister is asking whether you all have the government gazette. Okay. Oh, Francis, file WhatsApp. Oh, it's already there. Oh, good. Yes. EP, if you could also find a mechanism for them to have your regulations as well that you have just crafted. Colleagues, that, no, you wanted to say?
No, for now it's in 3 languages, but we are translating it to the other languages. It will eventually be available in all languages, South African languages.
That again, let's thank you, colleagues, because we can only speak to the people of our country through you. We again appreciate once again your conduit of the messages that we have given to the nation, from the president to the faith and the church leaders, and now to us here. We really appreciate the time that we have spent with us. I also appreciate you transmitting these messages to all our people throughout the country. Thank you, and thank you, and thank you very much. This press conference is adjourned.
And thank you to the Minister of